Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Welcome, everyone, to the podcast. I am Jason Romano. Today's episode with Brad Soderberg, the Virginia men's basketball assistant coach and national champion, is brought to you by Compassion International for $38 a month. It's such a great deal. You can release a child from poverty. It's that simple, but that powerful. Think about the words that I just said. Release a child from poverty. That is amazing. And that's what Compassion International does. It allows you and I to make that difference in a child's life. It's $38 a month. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum, compassion.com/sportspectrum. You'll see a list of children waiting to be sponsored. This is your chance to pray about it and then sponsor a child. Food, education, medical care, vocational training. That's where your $38 goes. All done in Jesus' name. Over 2 million children are being impacted by the great work being done at Compassion International. Check it out, compassion.com/sportspectrum, and sponsor a child today. It's always great when we can get an NCAA Division I national champion on the podcast. Brad Soderberg just became one. 2019 Virginia men's basketball national champions. He's an assistant coach with Virginia. And I really love when we can talk to people just weeks after they win a championship. We were able to do that with the Philadelphia Eagles a year and a half or so ago after they won the Super Bowl and beat New England. And it's awesome and a privilege to be able to talk to Brad Soderberg, the Virginia men's basketball assistant coach, here on the podcast. And we dive into what it's like to win a title and what that feeling has been like the last couple days. It's been 2 weeks now since they've won the championship. It's starting to sink in, but we also talk a lot about faith and how faith played a role in creating the culture in that locker room that allowed them to be prepared to go and win this national championship in ways that you just shake your head on when you look back and how they survived 3 straight nail-biting games against Purdue, Auburn, and then for the national championship against Texas Tech, going into overtime. An incredible run by Virginia, and their assistant basketball coach, Brad Soderberg, is our guest here on the podcast. Let's take a listen. Brad, welcome to the show.
Jason, thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
It's great to have you on. It's always great to talk to people who are part of a championship team pretty quickly after they've won it. It's been a little over a week since you finished off that. I mean, it's one of the most thrilling championship games and maybe championship runs that we've ever seen. Has it sunk in yet? Have you guys been able to kind of enjoy, I'm sure you have, these last couple, days and even a couple weeks now as being national champions? Has it sunk in?
I believe it has. We had a remarkable celebration here in Charlottesville on Saturday in our football stadium, and there was approximately 30,000 fans that came out for that, and that made it sink in quite a bit because you could just feel the appreciation from our fans, and it was a chance for our players to kind of celebrate together with them. So it was a special day, and I've been in this for 33 years, so I don't know that it will ever sink in. I appreciate what has happened more so now than I would have earlier in my career. And I think it'll take a little time to sink in, but the magnitude is starting to become real.
It's only been barely a few weeks now, really a week or so as we're taping this. It's a couple weeks when we release it. What's the coolest thing that's happened since winning the title for you thus far? Just that's pretty neat. That would have never happened if we hadn't won this whole thing.
Well, on a personal note, I grew up in central Wisconsin. My parents are both 80 years old. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. I have 3 children and 3 grandchildren. And the fact that the venue for this year's Final Four was the closest one to where my parents live and my siblings are, they were all able to be there. So on a personal note, that was the most significant thing for me. To be part of a national championship team was one thing. To share it with my family, to hold my oldest grandson under the confetti at center court was incredible. To to take a family picture with the national championship trophy. How do you put that into words? I mean, it was literally just a dream come true. There's no other way to put it.
Brad Soderberg is our guest here on the podcast. What was it like just sort of being on that sideline during those very tense moments? I mean, you had the Elite Eight game, the Final Four game, heck, even the first round game when you're down and trailing in that first half. And so many people I know on Twitter and people who I follow and have been keeping tabs on were like, here we go again. I just wonder what it's like to be on those sidelines in tense moments and seeing that even the national championship game all coming down to the wire. I mean, I can't imagine, and I've coached a little bit, but just the nerves and the anxiety maybe and the things that are going through as an assistant, and I know you're not the head coach, but as an assistant being right there with Tony, what's kind of that like for you, that experience?
Well, I think anyone who's coached, whether it's been at a high level or the lower levels or high school or whatever, you've been in scenarios where the game is close. And the truth of the matter is, I think when you're in the moment, it's not as nerve-wracking as it might appear because we're so focused on next possession, next sub. What should we call? What are they doing? How do we counter? So you're sort of in the midst of it. But then when it's over and you realize, oh my goodness, we just beat Purdue on a buzzer beater. We just beat Auburn because of a crazy foul in the corner. We just, whatever the case may be, I think the realization of what happened maybe 5 minutes after the game is over is more astounding than the supposed anxiety you have in the middle of it. I think the fact that we play in the ACC and we find ourselves in these scenarios more often than not kind of prepares us for it. I don't know that we could have ever prepared ourselves for the sequence of 3 games that led to the national championship, but nonetheless, it wasn't totally foreign either.
Well, preparation is such a big thing. I know, especially at the highest level of athletics and something that Coach Bennett and I know and you are very detailed with, I guess, in terms of the preparation. And so many people last year, have been talking about losing that 16 seed to a 1 seed game. And I remember talking to so many people in my circle of influence that thinking about, as I'm watching you guys make that run this year, that your story is going to be used in sermons, in churches, and talks across the country about redemption. Did you sense that even going back to the beginning of this past season that something special could happen? I mean, you don't want to kind of talk about it too much, but you want to be aware that there's something cool that could happen and the story could be even bigger based upon not what happened last year, but what could happen this year and the preparation that it took to get involved with that. Did you sense that?
I can't admit that I did, because the anyone that thinks that we could dream of being national champions is a little unrealistic. And again, maybe my comment is a product of being in the business for this long. It is incredibly difficult to become national champions. You have to be very good. You have to be on the same wavelength for long stretches. You have to stay healthy. You have to get lucky. And all those things have to come together. So for me to predict or to think that was going to happen would be a lie. However, we were flat on our backs 13 months ago. We literally, like I was questioning how Tony was going to be able to take this group, this program off the mat and just get us going in the right direction, much less get us back to the pinnacle of the ACC and into the NCAA tournament. And he found a way. We all contributed to one extent or another, but for anyone to think that Tony wasn't the primary reason that we're where we are, they're not paying attention. He did a remarkable job to steady the ship, to get everybody going in the right direction, to make a couple of personnel changes with recruiting. Case in point, bringing on Kihei Clark, who doesn't fit the dimensions of an ACC player, but was exactly what we needed to face some of the smaller guards we face in postseason play. All those things went into it, and I would be lying if I said it's what I thought was going to happen.
But yet still there's preparation involved to allow for those moments to happen, right? That you kind of have to get your guys ready both on the court, but even mentally to be able to, I guess, withstand the kind of pressure that you guys face going into a Final Four.
No, well said. Well said. In fact, no question, we prepare as a staff, like many staffs do, just with great diligence and with a fine-tooth comb. But I think where Tony did an incredible job is that he took last year and used it many times during the season to help our guys prepare for what lied ahead. And it started with him shortly after the loss to UMBC, addressing our team and saying the first step is this: we're going to own the loss. We're going to own it. He said we're not going to make an excuse. We're not going to blame anybody else. We're not going to, whatever the case may be, we're going to own the fact that we lost, and we're going to own the criticism that we're going to take, and we're going to own the pressure that's going to be put on us. And I think the mere fact that he did that, and we addressed it in private meetings with our team, was really good. I mean, I think it was the perfect starting point for us to make our way back. And the mere fact that 12 months later, we finished 31-3 a year ago. We got back to that same pinnacle. We were 31-3 this year and on our way to the NCAA tournament. The ability for a program to do that after getting punched in the mouth, to me is amazing. And again, Tony deserves a ton of the credit, but those players who were a part of last year's loss, who got up off the mat and got back in the gym and got back in the weight room and just kept grinding, is inspirational.
Brad Soderberg from Virginia is our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. We had Coach Bennett on a year ago on the podcast, a little less than a year ago. It was more like the fall of 2018, and we talked about that loss and kind of the shaping of that team, and it was really powerful. I've gone back and listened to that interview a couple times, especially since you've won your title, and hearing what he was talking about and how he was owning that loss, like you said, even back in before the season started. But he creates a really interesting culture, I guess, in that locker room that I've heard from many people who know him, and certainly just in interviewing him, about how his faith is so important to him and how he wears that on his sleeve, but in a positive way to impact his players, and how he creates such a cool atmosphere within that team. Can you talk about that a little bit and share kind of how that kind of trickles down even to how you go about coaching the team, and really how the players go about buying into that program?
We could talk about this for hours. First of all, I've known Tony since he was in junior high. I played for his dad, and I was a senior at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point when Tony was in either 7th or 8th grade. So I've known him forever. The other thing that's important in answering this question is I know his wife very well. His wife, Laurel, and Tony met in Charlotte when Tony played for the Hornets, and she was a youth pastor at a church. And the relationship that Tony and Laurel have, beyond being husband and wife, is that they're disciples of the Lord. And that is the foundation of Virginia basketball. It really is, because Tony is the head of our program. He is a life partner to Laurel, and the two of them are a couple in love with our Lord. And I know that Laurel's influence on Tony has been profound, because when things have gotten hard for Tony, when his career has had some bumps, when he's had a loss like UMBC, he has his wife, who's not only on the same page as Tony, but a constant advocate to return to the Lord, to be faithful to wherever he's leading Tony. And I think that has gone unsaid to a lot of people. I think that Laurel has a huge impact on this. And for that reason, back to your question, Tony is not afraid to share his faith. He never pounds it into the guys, or he never force feeds them with what he believes. But he's also very bold in the foundational principles that we have in our program and relating those to the Bible and the idea of humility and servanthood and passion and thankfulness. I mean, you just don't hear many people talk that way in the world of athletics. And I'm proud to be a part of a program under Tony's direction that has those as its pillars.
And how has that affected you personally in the way that you coach, in the way that you walk in your walk with the Lord? How has that affected you just watching him?
Well, I'm jealous of Tony to an extent because I've been a head coach for 19 years in my career. And if I have any regrets, it's that I wasn't able to have the same disposition, the same day-to-day trust and the day-to-day faith that Tony appears to have. No one will ever know what's in the heart of a man, but it sure is evident to me that Tony is first a Christian and then a basketball coach. And he doesn't appear to let a win or a loss change who he is as a man. And to me, that's what I said a second ago, I'm jealous of him. That's why I caught myself, and I'm sure many other coaches who are Christian coaches have caught themselves in the trap that I was in, where I professed to be a faithful Christian, but when things went south, I kind of let that define me. And I don't see that in Tony. And I think that's what makes him special.
I want to ask you about a couple players on your roster from this past year and what they meant to you coaching them. Both of them just in the last few days announced declaring for the NBA draft, Deandre Hunter and Todd Jerome. Can you talk a little bit about those guys and the impact that they had on this team and being able to coach them over the last year or so?
Well, first of all, around here, you can't say Ty Jerome without saying DeAndre Hunter and vice versa. They literally are inseparable. It's kind of, we kind of joke at them, but if you see one coming down the hallway, the other one is sure to be right behind them, and they're best of friends. But this is the thing. The thing about Ty and DeAndre and a number of other guys in our program, their work ethic beyond practice and weight room time is astounding. They put in extra hours in a way that I haven't seen many athletes do in my 33 years in the business. And that to me is why we're good this year and why we've been good during their careers here. It has to do with their commitment to becoming better day by day. Specifically to Ty Jerome, and I mean this sincerely, I have never met a more ferocious competitor than Ty. I mean, he might be playing his mother in a game of pinochle, and he's gonna fight to the bone to win that thing. And he's competitive in every single drill, every single board game, card game, whatever. He plays to win. And to me, he's a limited athlete from NBA standards, but I have no doubt he'll make it in the league because of his competitiveness.
What about Kyle Guy? He's a guy who, a player that really kind of thrived in the moment, watching him in a lot of those big moments, especially hitting those 3 free throws in the Final Four semifinal game, which I was able to attend against Auburn. Tell us about Kyle Guy a little bit and some things that stand out about him.
2 things. One is Kyle Guy loves the game of basketball. Yeah. That sounds weird, but some guys, they work hard and they train hard, but they don't really love it. He loves it. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if, 2 days after we got back from that long run to the national championship, he was in the intramural gym on campus just playing. He just loves to play. He plays the game with a joy. He has a smile on his face. No matter the setting, he'll joke and laugh, and he'll actually, it irritates us on the bench sometimes. He's talking to the other team all the time. And it's not because he's anything other than a guy that loves the game of basketball. And secondly, he was built for the moments that he shined in this year. For example, much is made of the 3 free throws he made against Auburn. That was his time. he was wired for that. Other guys would cower away from that pressure. He loved it. He loved it. It was what he was built for as a basketball player. Those two things are always going to stick with me, that here's the guy that loved the game as much as anyone I've seen, and secondly, was built for the most pressure-packed situations. During his time at Virginia, the biggest buckets he's made have been in the biggest settings, be it a big bucket at Duke or going crazy at Syracuse or making 3 free throws in the semifinals. That was right up his alley.
And so much is made about all three of these guys that we just talked about the men that they've become. Tell me about watching guys come in through their freshman year, and these guys have been there, a few of them for a little bit longer than others, but watching them develop as people, because I've had many coaches and even some that I talked to at the Final Four in Minneapolis tell me it's great and you can be a national champion and you'll always be that. But if these guys don't become great men, great people, then you didn't do your job in the sense of having them turn into the way that you would like to see them turn into in the impact that you have as a coach. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, again, I don't mean to deflect the question, but the credit, in my opinion, goes to both Tony and to each of those young men. The players have to be receptive to instruction, and then you have to have a head coach that is persistent in his instruction. Tony teaches our pillars, which I mentioned earlier: humility and passion and thankfulness, servanthood, and so on, as much as he does passing and catching and defending and rebounding. So on a daily basis, in one way or another, these young men are going to hear about why is it important that you remain humble? Why is it so important that you know who you are? Well, coach will talk to them about that as much as the fact that they've got to block out, Carolina on the glass or we have no chance to win. And to me, that not only does that help us win games, but as you pointed out in this question, it develops young men. And the reason I believe this to be so true is I listen to the comments of guys who are currently Virginia alums in the NBA. When Malcolm Brogdon got Rookie of the Year, he made reference to the 5 pillars. Are you kidding me? I mean, that didn't happen by mistake. It didn't happen that Malcolm just happened to recall that when they did the interview for him, Rookie of the Year. It's a part of who he is now. He learned from Tony the value of those foundational principles. And I think that's why these guys have become the men that they are.
Brad Soderberg's been our guest here on the podcast. Last couple of questions, Brad. I just wonder from a coaching perspective, where we are, we're taping this, it's still April, still very fresh that you guys just won, but what is your typical schedule look like to turn around and go back at it again? Because you won a title and you want to savor it and you want to enjoy it, but you still have a job to do. So how quickly have you even had discussions with Coach Bennett on how quickly you got to kind of turn around and go back to work here?
It's funny you said that. I got a cup of coffee today at my favorite spot, and the guy that gives me my coffee says, "Well, Coach, can we win it next year?" And I wanted to go right back out in my car. Like, come on, man. But I don't know. We've the great news of making a run to the national championship is that all the kudos that go with it. The hard part is that you fall behind in recruiting, at least from the standpoint we haven't been able to communicate with as much as we could with kids. So right now, we're trying to get our recruiting, make sure our roster is set steady for next year. And we haven't really talked that much about where we go from here because we won't do any spring workouts because we only have 2 more weeks of classes and then final exams. So there'll be no spring workouts. And then the guys will reconvene in the summer when we do our summer workouts. So, but again, the value and the benefits of being national champions far outweighs anything that we may have lost with anything else. But again, knowing Tony, I know what it's going to be. We're going to do what we do. We're going to be who we are. We're going to sell the product that we sell. And I think everything else will take care of itself.
Last question here, Coach, and this has been great. Thank you so much for your time. I always ask this question to every guest we have on the podcast. I think it's unique for you because you're coming off of the highest of highs as a coach, as being part of a championship program. But what's the greatest lesson the Lord has taught you this season? What's something that God has really impressed upon your heart going through this journey in the past year that's really been something that you can take away and say, yeah, that's the biggest lesson I learned?
It's kind of a personal answer, and we don't know each other well enough for you to know my background, but this is it. And it is, I think our Lord is asking us to surrender our will to him, to just trust that what he has planned for us, and scripture tells us he has a plan for each of us, is what's in our best interest. And we have to trust that. And because I'm in the athletic world, I think it requires mental toughness. I think each of us needs to be mentally tough enough to be faithful to God's plan. And when things appear to go a direction we don't think they should, we have to be mentally tough enough to go, okay, Lord, if this is the path you want me to walk right now, in faith, I'm going to walk that way. And then, as it relates to that, day by day, do your job. Show up on time and do the best you can. I've preached that to my players as a head coach my whole career. Just show up every day, be there on time, and make your absolute best effort, and then have faith that God's plan is what's best. That's what I've learned over the last 12 months, because there's been some rocky roads as a part of this trip, but God has been faithful. And I would say that even if we hadn't won as much as we had, I believe that those of us that are believers, we have a wonderful gift. We just have to unpack it and believe in it.
Here's Brad Soderberg, Virginia men's basketball assistant coach, 2019 NCAA Division I national champion. Coach, thanks so much for being here on the podcast. Hopefully we'll do it again and be able to dive in a little deeper into the faith angle, but this has been great. I really appreciate your time. Again, congratulations, and thanks for joining us.
It was my pleasure, Jason. Thank you.
Many thanks to Brad Soderberg, the Virginia men's assistant basketball coach, for joining us here on the podcast. 2019 NCAA Division I national champions in college basketball, and just loved hearing him. You know what was my favorite part? Really loved hearing him deflecting the answers. He kept saying he was deflecting the answers, but what he was doing was really putting the credit onto others, which is really a great sign and a true sign of a believer in being humble. Is he gave all the credit to Tony Bennett. He gave all the credit to his players, talking about Deandre Hunter and Ty Jerome and Kyle Guy. He gave all the credit to those guys, didn't take one single ounce of credit. And obviously, I mean, he's an assistant coach. Brad Soderberg had a huge role in helping that team to become national champions this year. But I loved his humility. He was practicing what he was preaching, and really great to have him join us here on the podcast. It'll be fun to watch them try to do it again next year. That's always the challenge when you win a title. But I know that they're going to be enjoying for a couple more weeks here being national champions before they get back to work for the 2019-2020 college basketball season. Many thanks to Coach Soderberg for joining us. Many thanks to Compassion International for sponsoring this podcast. $38 a month allows you the chance to release a child from poverty. We're so proud and grateful to be partnering with Compassion International here on this podcast. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum and sponsor a child in Jesus' name. Listen, over 150,000 children are coming to know Jesus Christ through the sponsorships and the great work being done at Compassion International. Make that difference in a child's life today for $38 a month. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum and please consider sponsoring a child today. Thanks for listening to this episode with Coach Soderberg. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Tag us there. Post about this podcast. We'll retweet it and like it and share it and comment and all that good stuff on social media. Let people know about the stories that you're hearing here at Sports Spectrum. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel where every podcast is found. Also a ton of videos, really great content, rich content on our Sports Spectrum YouTube page. And all of our content can be found, as always, at sportspectrum.com. Bookmark that website. I promise you there's new content every single day. You don't want to miss it. Articles, first-person increase stories from athletes themselves, and daily devotionals as well as the podcast. Go to sportspectrum.com. Check it out. Bookmark it. I promise you, you'll love it. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. We love you guys. We appreciate you checking us out and hearing and listening to these stories of sports and faith. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time. This is the Sports Spectrum Podcast.